Welcome to today's program, and thank you for joining us. I am C. Virginia Fields, former Manhattan Borough President and current President and CEO of the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. Mission of the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS, also known as NBLCA, is to educate, mobilize, and empower Black leaders to meet the challenge of fighting HIV/AIDS and other health disparities in their local communities. Queerocracy is a social group of young LGBTQ and gender non-conforming youth under the age of 30 who are engaged in organizing projects to win immediate and concrete changes for their communities. Through direct action, organizing, membership-led advocacy campaigns, educational trainings, and political art and media, they challenge and fight back against the existing structures that thrive on the punishment of positive and queer folks. Queerocracy is dedicated to ending homelessness and the HIV/AIDS crisis in New York State and the stigma, discrimination, and criminalization that fuel their existence. On today's program, we will speak with staff and advocates from Queerocracy. Just a few facts. According to the National Coalition for the Homeless report in 2009, homelessness can be both a cause for and effect of HIV infection. The risk for HIV infection is 16 times higher among homeless persons, especially among youth of color. Approximately 30% of LGBTQ youth in the United States have been physically abused by family members because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, and LGBTQ youth are estimated to comprise up to 40% of the homeless youth population in the United States. LGBTQ youth become homeless at a significantly higher rate than the adolescent population as a whole and are vastly overrepresented in the runaway homeless youth population. Studies further indicate that LGBT youth have a 120% higher risk for homelessness, which is consistent with specific reports that show that LGBTQ youth make up 25 to 40% of the homeless youth populations here in New York City and other large cities, compared with 3 to 6% of the general population. Statistics show that LGBT youth are about 3 times more likely to contemplate suicide than their cisgender and heterosexual peers, and about 5 times more likely to attempt suicide sometimes. The numbers are even higher for transgender youth. So here to discuss all of these issues and to help us understand a lot of what is happening, the topics are Janae, Sumpter, and Asin, Bragg. And thank you so much to both of you for joining us. I know that the work you're doing is so incredibly important. And so before we move to talk about that, I'd just like to say with Janae, who is originally from New Orleans, have lived here in the city almost for a year now. And Janae is a graduate art student and a youth organizer at Vocal New York as their Queerocracy organizer. And she's working on her degree while she's also doing all of this incredible organizing. And we have Asin Bragg, who is an artist and an activist. And Asin is currently the outreach coordinator for the New York Transgender Advocacy Group, and working with various organizations around the city and beyond to try to combat systemic oppression and make an impact in their community. And through art and performance, he helps, or she helps to help people to discover their love for connecting, inspiring, and motivating others to come as they are. So we're so happy to have both of you. And another thing that I want to mention about you, Janae, that I found very interesting is that in your work with this amazing group of LGBTQ homeless and street-involved young folks, helping them to build their self-confidence, helping them to be able to combat social justice injustices, I would say, in order to transform their own communities and to help them get involved. And we're going to talk a little bit about exactly what that means and perhaps some practices that you found to be really good that others might want to follow. But before we get started on some of the questions, there are two things I'd like for you to do. First of all, I'd like for you to define several terms, because what I find in the work that we do, we often say things and our viewers, or if we're making presentations in various forums, have no idea what some of the terms mean. So to start off, why don't we at least define several terms that I've already mentioned. Cisgender, transgender, and gender non-conforming. Either one or both.
Okay. So cisgender, to be cisgender, well, the word cisgender means that you identify with, if you identify with being cisgender, you basically identify with the assigned gender from birth. If you're transgender, you don't identify with the assigned gender from birth. And you either want to transition physically or emotionally, spiritually. However, you know, everybody's transition is different. It's not the same. It's not a blanket experience. Everybody's experience is different with that. And the other terminology?
Gender non-conforming. So gender non-conforming.
Gender non-conforming.
So those are folks who do not identify within the spectrum at all, who are also very fluid within that as well. So whether they go between being the pronouns of she, also being the pronouns of he, or being they. So really just being fluid and not within the spectrum at all with gender non-conforming.
And I think that's so important because terms are extremely important in terms of the people we work with, as well as others whom we're trying to partner with, because I think it was President Barack Obama who said at one of the World AIDS Day events, all hands on deck. We need everybody involved in this fight, whether one is heterosexual, LGBTQ, cisgender, transgender, non-conforming. Everybody needs to be at the table, and we all need to work on this together to combat HIV, discrimination, and fight for social justice in the ways that both of you are involved with. The other thing that I want you to do is just briefly tell our viewers about the organization itself. Queerocracy is probably a term or the name of an organization that many of our viewers probably have never heard of. So could you just tell us a little about the organization? When did it come about? How did it come about? And why did it come about?
So Queerocracy is underneath Vocal, is an organizing project underneath Vocal as our HIV prevention work. So with that, Queerocracy has been around with Vocal since 2015. Before that, it was created and founded in 2012 with a bunch of amazing individuals and women who are coming from different schools within our different colleges, wanted to come together to figure out how can we start addressing the epidemic of HIV and AIDS. How can we use this also with ending the stigma and really bringing that to light. When they graduated, that's when Vocal ended up coming into play and taking over and adopting it essentially to be more of the HIV prevention work. Within that, we end up realizing that a lot of the folks who are who identify as LGBTQ, the reason why all of this occurs is also we look at the factor of homelessness, we look at the factors of what it means to be street involved, all these different factors that play a very key point into leading, I guess, the epidemic of thinking about HIV and AIDS. So we really use that, and we moving down the space now. I've been in this position probably for 4 months now. of just navigating and realizing how all of these play a key point within our relationships, our environment, how we interact with ourselves. So that's really the work with Queerocracy now. We're really just moving down the space of how can we address these different issues? How can we move forward as young people to really make a change, to not only make a change, but to make a sustainable change, to make a change that's good and better for all of us, and really a long-lasting change, and bringing young people voices to the table. It's so important that we need to be in that space of how we can mobilize together.
So you're basically here in New York City, New York State now.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and getting set up and okay. And you talked a lot about using an intersectional lens to your work. So in your work, how do you use an intersectional approach to address stigma, discrimination against LGBTQ and TGNC? That's why it was important for us to define those terms. So when I now say TGNC, our viewers know we're talking about transgender non-conforming.
That is correct.
That is correct.
So that helps all of us, right? So how do you use the approach, an intersectional approach to address stigma, discrimination against LGBT and TGNC communities?
Within Queerocracy?
Yes,
So within Queerocracy,
within
I
the
feel
work
like,
that you do, right?
within the work that I do and my experience with Queerocracy, I noticed that when in using that lens in particular, I feel like you guys are very all-inclusive. You don't tell anyone that they're not allowed to be an ally or help because of their background or their experience or,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. So, yeah, I feel like when I've done some of the direct action and I've done some of the organizing work with Queerocracy, I've seen a lot of different faces. I've seen a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different identities, and it feels really all-inclusive.
So it is about being inclusive.
That's correct.
And so using what we call an intersectional lens, it sort of brings everybody into this work.
Yes.
And you're finding that that's really making a difference as, well, when you think about, and of course both of you are much too young to know about, you've read about it, I'm sure, but you know, a lot of the struggles and the fights much earlier on with respect to HIV/AIDS, and a lot of the work that ACT UP led all of us to be much more proactive. A lot of that, in many ways, it was solo in terms of looking through one lens and not being as inclusive, and as changes were made, as achievements were made, improvements were made, I think that focus began to change, and that's where we are now, recognizing that because there's so many factors that impact our work, so many social determinants, whether it's poverty, lack of education, unemployment, mental health issues, until we take a focus on all of those issues and have a broader outreach to persons who are impacted and or living with HIV and AIDS, we're going to keep fighting the same battle. So I think that was part of what I was interested in terms of what you had said about taking the intersectional approach. So as the organizer, lead organizer, just tell us a little about what you do specifically, and then we'll have Asin tell us how he listens to what you tell him, tell her what you're supposed to do.
With being in this work in general, I personally realized that it's important to take this intersectional approach to this. Just because as we look at previous moves before, it's always been the space of it wasn't inclusive at all. It was a space of like you would see the hetero normative standpoint and views on things, and it just wasn't a space where it was inclusive, where it was bringing one's voice to the table. And within Queerocracy now, we try to bring that to the table, whether we have folks, we are. Our base, and most of us are underneath the age of 25 years old.
Oh, really?
But the thing is, we do have allies. So our allies consist of people who are over that age. So how can we also think about the intergenerational perspective of how we can bring both of those together? And like we as Queerocracy and being in this space, which is so amazing, is that everyone comes from different spaces, whether you identify as cis, whether you identify as TGNC, whether you identify with it as Black or person of color or not so. Is more of like, how can we start facing the issue at hand and moving forward as a collective to make this positive change. And I feel like, me personally, feel like it's the only way we can move forward is if we start addressing the issue at hand and then making those prior changes. So that goes back to looking at previous movements, looking at how things were happening, then to realize and add our touch to move forward. So.
Okay, and Asin, as an artist and an activist, and you spoke earlier about pronouns.
Yes.
And I think that you certainly say your pronoun is they.
They, them.
They,
correct.
them, right? So as an artist and activist, they does exactly what? What is...
What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
So I like to write poetry. I'm working on a book. I like to also write plays. And I like, my idea for the future, the near future, is to create employment initiative for underserved demographics. Because of my intersectional identity, I fall into a bunch of different communities, not just the LGBT community. And what I really want to do is provide an opportunity and a platform to basically authentically represent yourself, whatever community, whatever identity or background you come from, and tell your own story while telling my story and the story of many other people around issues like homelessness, like mental health, like discrimination. Right, I have a play that I wrote on colorism, which I have a lot of different ideas around how to alleviate and dismantle stigmas surrounding different communities and people from different ethnic and background and experience, especially oppressed communities. I really want to structure it in a way where it seems traditional, but when you walk into the space and when you walk in to see my play, you're gonna see these characters and you're gonna be like, but the book says this person is this gender or this and this, and I want those people to represent what that is for them. So I do a lot of art around that, poetry, like I said, plays, and I involved myself a lot I was doing a lot of work with Queerocracy at one point. I had to take a step away just because of this. I'm also one of the people who experiences, one of the LGBT youth who experiences homelessness, which is why I really was excited to come in and have a conversation today. So facing that, I haven't been able to work on some projects, but I do have a lot of great ideas, and I am working with a lot of different organizations like Brooklyn Pride Path, Queerocracy, NITAG, to make those things come to life.
So you said you're working on a book also?
That is correct. Poetry book.
A poetry book. You want to talk a little about it, or is it too soon?
Is
this a pitch? You never know who's watching. Somebody might pick it up and say, "Hey, that's a great idea."
I don't want them to steal it now.
Don't go into that kind of detail. Just enough to let folks know where you're going.
I'm really looking, I really do enjoy the touch and feel of a book, like an intimate experience with books. I love to read. So I really want it to be interactive in that way. I remember the first poetry book that I picked up, which was, which was Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Warsan Shire. The feel of the book itself was just something that stayed with me, the cover, the drawing, the illustrations. I really want to make something that incorporates both art and words, not just a book that you're like, okay, poetry, and it's just pretty bland and it's poems, but I want to do something like, are you familiar with the poet, I think it's R.L. Stein, who does drawings with every poem?
Yep.
I'm really inspired by that, and I want to have a book that has little drawings to represent what I'm either experiencing or thinking of when I write these poems. So that's what I hope to do.
Well, it sounds like your vision is certainly there, and I think with your determination, you're going to be very successful, and we certainly
Thank you very much.
look to supporting you in that effort. Some of the work that my organization in NBLCA engages with young people in various parts of the country. We have affiliates in 11 cities around the country. Atlanta, Tampa, Detroit, and we're working in Baton Rouge, and of course in New York City and throughout New York State. And what we find in working with a lot of young people is that they too want to be heard. We've had some focus groups with young people specifically around PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, just to find out where they were in their awareness, their education, their understanding. Of course, needless to say, they're not taking PrEP for many different reasons, some personal and other things. But what we do find is that they want to be heard and taking tangible steps in ways to try to maximize their voices. And some of that we're seeing voting, which is very important. So how can you, or how can we, through your work, you think, successfully engage and mobilize the LGBTQ and TGNC youth to develop coalition-wide participation as a specific population and group of young people, as we're seeing in some of the others, especially the ones out there now leading on voting?
It's really simple to get folks in that space. The thing is, especially with Queerocracy, something that we look at is having young people at the table is what gets tangible change. So the thing is, if you're addressing, if you're talking about issues that are affecting certain communities, that even goes for being within the Black community. If we have these different campaigns, different policies that we're working on, we'll want to be sitting at the table. We'll want to be within the spaces making those decisions with you. So that's like the biggest thing that we think about, and what we do is like, and if that isn't happening, that's when we make change and we like, okay, this isn't happening, we're going to do a direct action, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Because if you're doing something, you're addressing something that's within our community or the most high-risk communities in general, why not have them in those spaces making those decisions with you, as it is affecting them? So that's the biggest thing that we focus on. And as being a young person, and just being a person in general, we all want to be heard to an extent. We all want our voices to be acknowledged. We all want all of those things. So how can we start thinking and shifting our way of thinking for a second and put ourselves in another person's perspective just for a second and be like, oh, wow, this person, like, if I was just be in that space, I would kind of want to be sitting down with you making those decisions. So when we think from that perspective, like, okay, wow, maybe I should like do different sessions and bring someone in. I really appreciate that you were doing that, because it's important, like, to go and to hear these different voices, to bring sessions together and just to talk. You can gain so much from learning each other. I always say that we are all teachers and students of one another. We all learn something and we all teach something to one another. So that's the biggest thing that we do as Queerocracy, is like, how can we get our people at that table? How can we like shift the narrative and realize everyone has a story and that everyone's story needs to be heard?
And that goes back to the earlier conversations about being inclusive in terms of the people. But again, a lot of the tables I sit at and see places, it is still not as inclusive in terms of the voices of those persons who are most impacted, whether it is homeless youth, to be able to tell that story, to be able to meet with legislators. And I know Vocal, is engaged in a lot of work in that regard. So what are some of the other pressing issues in the community that you like to give voice to? I know what we're doing with homelessness. What are some of the other pressing issues that you like to give voice to, that you'd like for our viewers to know at least
So
about?
not only just homelessness, but just humanizing underserved communities as a whole. We have a lot of issues right now today where children are being put in cages, trans women are being shot, stabbed, killed.
All the time.
Black women, besides black trans women, are being kidnapped, taken. It's a lot of issues that I feel like are surrounding the root of the issue, which is, or the root of the problem, which is humanizing people. We've been fighting literally, if we undress all of these educated terms and words, all we're doing is asking for our fellow human beings to say, I acknowledge you as a human. Yeah, you have all the organs I have. You dwell on earth with me. We have to share. Like, I don't understand. I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't understand why we're still fighting for human rights when I can look at Janae and understand and recognize Janae's human. I can look at you, you're human. I can look at anybody outside and understand that that's a human being. But on paper, legislative, politics, institutions, we're not human, which is amazing to me. I feel like we need to work on, instead of trying to, implement democracy in other countries, we need to start at home, and we need to start with education systems. We need to start, pardon me, I'm a little chilly. We need to start with dismantling incarceration systems. And as we revise our politics and as we revise our legislation, we need to go back and revise the mistakes we made. You can't say, well, marijuana is legal now, so there's tons of young black men, young black women, young people of color that are still in jail for life sentences with 10 years over things like marijuana. I just think we need to practice what we preach, and we need to truly be present and be aware and be intentional about the change that we want to make, not a show and tell sort of, oh look, you guys have rights now. Oh look, you can get married, but you're still not human. We don't want that. What I'm saying is we need to begin, pardon me, I'm a little jittery.
You're doing excellent.
We need to begin with, especially like you said earlier, language is coded. Well, if you didn't say that, but the English language is very coded in itself. And I feel like, especially around politics, we need to be very specific and nuanced on what it is that we want, because that's how they find the loopholes if you're not specific. So to begin with that, I want to eradicate the word tolerance. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be accepted for who I am. And if you can't accept that, then so be it. But I don't want there to be this pseudo acceptance where I still feel unsafe in communities that say they're for me, serving me, or affirming to my identity and the communities that I fall within.
You have actually done a wonderful summary to this discussion, and the words you use, like humanizing people and building actions around that, is extremely powerful. And I think certainly as I listened to you, the thought that sort of ran through my mind is, how can we in a faster way get this into the media, get it out there among the masses of people from the perspective that was just discussed? Because that is what I think is missing. We know that. We talk about it. We hear it. But we've got to do a greater job in terms of getting it out there. So unfortunately, our time is up. And I'm going to just thank both of you, the Queerocracy team, for joining us today. And for those who are watching, for more information about the program, you may call 929-320-7824. And to learn more about NBLCA, I invite you to visit our website, NBLCA.org. And also look for NBLCA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. The Manhattan Neighborhood Network brings these programs to you to better inform you, the viewer, about the important topics that impact your health and well-being. So please let your family, friends, and neighbors know about this programming. I am C. Virginia Fields, and I thank you for joining us, and hope you'll tune in next time for NBLCA's Health Action TV right here on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.